Javier Becerra, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. I'm actually joined by a number of colleagues, but before I get into the introduction of our colleagues, I want to take a moment to allow a very special guest here in Washington, D.C. to say a hello and maybe a few quick words. Amir Hekmati, some of you will recognize the name, someone who has given service to this country in uniform, also spent some time in Iran. And he is here, and I'd like to let his representative in the House of Representatives, Dan Kildee, give us a quick introduction. So Mr. Hekmati might, if he wishes, say a couple of words. Dan Kildee.
Thank you, Javier. One of the proudest moments I've had since I've been here was when I was able to fly to Germany with Amir Hekmati's family to welcome him to freedom. And after meeting him, being so impressed with the incredible grace and dignity and real spirit that this man has been able to maintain after 4.5 years in one of the worst places on earth. I'm very proud to call him not just my constituent, but now, since he's been home, my very good friend, Amir Hekmati. Here you go.
Thank you, Congressman Kildee. Thank you, everybody. I'm just so thrilled to be here. It's been a very long journey, 4.5 years, and throughout these couple of years, we've been hearing in the prison about all the amazing support that my representative, as well as many of the members of Congress, had done for us. So to finally be standing here, just over a month, I was sitting in an Iranian prison, and I was supposed to be there for a decade, and now I'm here. So I'm just so grateful and thankful to everybody, and it's just a testament of how amazing the Congress is and everything that they've done for me, so I'm just really grateful.
Amen. Thank you, Amir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So we want to say thank you again to Mr. Hekmati and thank him in a big way, not just for his words, but for his courage. And Dan, thank you for all the work that you've done. You were tireless in this effort to try to help Mr. Hekmati. I don't know how many times we recall you're chiming in when the discussion was about the Iran nuclear deal and how your laser focus was, and what about those who are being held in Iran who are U.S. citizens, including Mr. Hekmati. So thank you for that. So let's do this. What we're going to do is we're going to ask, I'm going to ask the Vice Chairman to say a few words. Then I will ask Ms. Brenda Lawrence from Michigan to say a few words. And then I will ask Ms. Debbie Dingell from Michigan to say a few words. And then we'll go from there. And so I'd like to begin first by just taking a moment to acknowledge the victims and the families in Kalamazoo who are right now experiencing what folks in San Bernardino experienced, what folks throughout the country. Charleston, I don't know, you can name any number of places where mass killings have occurred, but what we'd like to do is say to them, you have our thoughts and prayers. Yesterday in the House, we held a moment of silence for the victims and their families in Kalamazoo. Problem is, of course, that may be the only thing this Congress does to try to help people who are the victims of mass killings and the victims of senseless gun violence. It seems like the allegiance of too many in this Congress is not with the victims and the families and with the American people who want to be safe, but with the NRA, and that is distressing. But it doesn't stop there. It seems like the allegiance of too many in the U.S. Senate, as we saw yesterday, is not with the people of this country and the Constitution of this country, but with their particular party. Republicans in the Senate have declared that they will not consider the nomination made by the President of the United States to fill the vacancy of Justice Antonin Scalia to the Supreme Court. So for more than a year, the Supreme Court will have to function with only 8 members instead of 9, which could jeopardize rulings in so many important cases. But again, it seems like the allegiance of the members in the Senate on the Republican side is with their party and not with the Constitution. It seems like too many members in government are aligned not with the people in Flint, Michigan, but with the actions of their particular interest and their authorities. Why is it that the families in Flint, Michigan had to wait so long before they were even informed that they were drinking poisoned water that had lead in it? And then, of course, we find the results in Kalamazoo, and the fact that we can't expect this Congress to take any action to try to make Americans safer and prevent the acts of senseless gun violence that we see in these mass killings that go on month after month. And so I think our message is it's time for Congress to do something. To do nothing is not action, and to do nothing is not why we get elected. Senators are being paid close to $200,000, not so that they just sit on their seats and not do anything about a vacancy on the Supreme Court, but to do something. And we should all do something, whether it's trying to prevent senseless gun violence, trying to prevent our water from being poisoned, trying to prevent a court from being crippled by political inaction. We all have to do something. And so we're hoping that our colleagues, whether it's the Speaker of the House or it's the Majority Leader in the Senate, that this Republican Congress will decide it's time to do something. And with that, let me yield now to the Vice Chair, Joe Crowley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I wanted to thank Secretary Perez for coming to our caucus this morning as well to talk to us about a number of issues, not the least of which is the fiduciary rule that they're working on in the Department of Labor, which they is now at I believe at OMB, and at some point will be released to the general public. We all look forward to that, to see exactly what is in that rule and how that will play out, particularly as it pertains to the retiring-minded community in the United States. We all know that I believe we should know, if we don't all know, there is a retirement problem in our country. Not enough people are saving for the future. I have my own plan, building better savings, building brighter futures, that will address many of those issues. But there's a lot more that we all can be doing to ensure that the American people not only have the ways and means to retire, but are getting the right advice to do so as well. I just also want to just piggyback a little bit on in terms of what the chairman has said before. Obstruction is the word of the day. Obstruction is the word of the week. Obstruction is the word of the month. Obstruction has been the word of this year so far. Obstruction has been the word for the past almost 5.5 years in this Republican-led House of Representatives and now Republican-led Senate as well. We've gotten word that's come down from above that not only are Republican colleagues refusing to invite to the Capitol and to the Hill the budget director to talk about the president's budget, and now they have postponed, they are punting the release of their own budget for another at least 3 weeks, maybe even longer. We don't know exactly when that will come forward. So everything that we've known to come to understand about how Capitol Hill operates and works in terms of timing and doing the people's business is now once again thrown into the wind. Maybe it's an opportunity for the Heritage Foundation to really put more pressure on the Republican majority to inflict more pain upon the American people. Maybe it's just to give the Republican caucus 3 more weeks to figure out who they want to hurt the most, whether it be Social Security recipients and cuts them, or maybe it's to just eliminate Head Start entirely. Because we know what their desires are in terms of reducing so-called the size of government. And what that really means in plain language is denying benefits to people in this country who need them most to survive and to get ahead and to advance in our country. I don't want to be a part of that obstructionism. We see what's happening in terms of the Senate and the Supreme Court. I think the American people expect us to do our jobs. That's what we sent us here to do. And instead, they find every which way to stick their heads in the sand. Quite frankly, there's not enough sand in the world for all of them to stick their heads in. And at the end of the day, the American people will demand action from them on the issue of Supreme Court, on the issue of a budget that speaks to the values of this country, the American people, and moving this country forward. With that, I know maybe we'll turn to Brenda. I'd ask Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence from the great state of Michigan to take the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Becerra. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to talk about the Flint water situation and oversight. I am proud to stand here with my colleagues, particularly with Congressman Kildee, who has had his heart broken as he labored to take care of the people that not only he represents, but it's his hometown and his family and friends. We had a human crisis to happen in America. There's some basic things that we expect from our government. We expect our air to be clean, to breathe. We expect our food to be safe for consumption, and the water that we drink will not harm us. And we have failed a basic trust in America. And we saw this happen when we had a governor who over 4 months ago apologized and say that the buck stopped with him. But yet and still, when he was called forward on the oversight committee to testify of what happened, because what is the role of oversight in the government, in Congress? That is to find out and validate that our agencies are working, our laws, clean water. I am the ranking member on the Interior, the Clean Water Act, the Food and Drug Administration, the EPA. We cannot allow this to happen again, ever again in America. It must be accountability. And for those who push back and said, why are you making this political? I do not call witnesses based on who they call their political allegiance to or who they pledge to. In this case, the answers must be given to those who are accountable. I want you all to just know how this is a human crisis. Think about if it was in your hometown. You're a pregnant mother and you're drinking water because you need water to sustain yourself. And every time you take a drink of water, you're poisoning your fetus. And you have given birth to a child. And you're hydrating so that you can breastfeed and give your child the necessary nutrition to live. And every time you feed your child, you're poisoning your child with lead that's killing brain cells. The brain cells that lead attacks kills the brain of a developing child. This, ladies and gentlemen, has to be bigger than Flint. We in America and this Congress must put their arms around the infrastructure in America when it comes to water, because it happened in Flint, and what community will be next? And I had people visiting me from another country, third world country, said, I never thought I would visit this amazing country and talk about issues we're struggling with in my country that has no resources. Water, clean, fresh, safe water. I'm proud to say that the governor, who after so many times refusing to come, will be coming before the committee. We will be asking those questions. And I want you to know that Congress is going to Flint. We're going to have a speak out. It's going to be March 4th. And we have so many members of Congress that want to find out how in the world did this happen in our great country. Not to point the finger, but to make sure those who are accountable are held accountable, and it never happens again in America. Never again. I also want to say to the families of those in Kalamazoo, again, we have a moment of silence and a lack of action. How many times are we going to stand up and bow our heads and pray for the families when we are sent here by the people to do the people's work, and we have not passed one single piece of legislation that would address gun violence in America? Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about the loopholes. If we really care, if you can stand there sometimes with tears in your eyes, grieving for these families, then do the work that we were sent here for. Let's address gun violence and pass some legislation in America. Thank you.
Debbie Dingell.
I want to thank Chairman Becerra, Vice Chair Crowley, and my Michigan colleagues. I think it's all been pretty much said. But, you know, I stand here from somebody from Michigan, which has really been going through some very tough times. As you saw us pull together in Detroit coming back, you've seen what's happened in Flint. You've heard all the facts. What we need is Congress to work together, as they did on Mr. Kildee's bill and the EPA transparency bill, and come together. There are 153,000 water systems in this country. What are we going to do together to make sure that what happened in Flint never happens again anywhere. That's one of the most serious problems facing us, and we've got to deal with it. And yesterday, I stood on the floor with all of my colleagues from Michigan, remembering the victims of Kalamazoo. We're praying right now for two victims. A little 14-year-old, when you see her face, just makes you cry, and we hope she lives. I've lived with the subject of gun violence my entire life. I've lived in a home. I've lived in two homes. I lived in a home with a man that shouldn't have had guns, and I've talked about it more. And how do we've got to change the paradigm on how we talk about guns. Because if we keep doing it the way we do it, we're never going to get an answer. I'm married to a man that was on the board of the NRA. He should be able to hunt and to fish. And I had a man that almost killed my mother. That was my father. He shouldn't have had his gun. I see both sides. I want us to come together from both sides and figure out how we don't just keep standing on the House floor, remembering the victims, but prevent them from happening again. Thank you.
Debbie, thank you for that. And with that, we will take a few questions. Yes.
Did Secretary Perez pop any of the GAO report that's come out suggesting a lot of unqualified people are getting through the healthcare.gov system?
Secretary Perez, who was one of our guests, focused on a number of subjects, principally talking about the work that the White House, the president, is doing to try to help working Americans. That was not a subject that was broached.
Can I get your thoughts, though, on the idea that unqualified people are getting into the nation's health?
Let me turn to some other questions because we wanted to focus on the issues that we just discussed as presenters. Yes.
Secretary Perez talked about the fiduciary rule, and I wanted to see if there's any concerns that the Democrat Party has with the rule before it's finalized, obviously, at this stage, that you see perhaps members, your colleagues, who would side with Republicans to stop the rule at this point.
So you're speaking of the proposed rule that deals with conflict of interest when it comes to financial planning, and the secretary touched on it, although he couldn't get into specifics because the rule has not been issued, and my colleagues can also chime in, but essentially what the secretary, along with Jeffrey Zients, the director of the National Economic Council, said is that they're looking for a way to make sure that for all investors, but especially modest income investors, that they have a way to know that they're going to make the best investment that's in their best interest, working with those financial advisors who work in the industry without having to worry that they will be ripped off by those that they are placing their trust and their life savings with. So he made it very clear that they've taken quite some time, 6 years, to issue the rule. They've talked to, as Secretary Perez said, he thought he had spoken to each and every member in the caucus who was present this morning at some point about this. So they're trying to do as thorough a job as they can in reaching out and listening to all the different concerns and issues that are being raised by all members, and that's why it's been taking quite some time, over close to 6 years, to do the rule. Let me see if my colleagues wish to answer as well.
I would only add to that I think there was a healthy discussion this morning, and there certainly are questions that members have across the gamut. And I think part of, a lack of a better term, maybe frustration, is that because it is in the rulemaking process, they cannot share actually what the final ruling will be. So that adds a little bit in terms of their inability to necessarily address specific questions to that. I don't think any of the members of our caucus would view siding with either side of the aisle, so to speak, in terms of the vote that they will take. They'll do what they believe is in the best interest of their constituency, and in terms of what they bring in terms of value to the debate. So I think it was healthy. I thought it was a good conversation. I think it's also, people are resigned to the fact that we have to wait for the rule to come out and wait and see what happens, what impact that would have.
Let me go ahead and move on so we can get to as many folks as we can. Go ahead.
Question for Mr. Kildee. Are you seeing any signs of progress on either side of the Capitol on getting some help for Flint?
Yes, I mean, obviously progress will be only significant if we can get something through Congress that provides direct relief. I've been talking to Senator Stabenow on an almost daily basis, along with Senator Peters, and there is some movement, although obviously we're very cautious about it. My colleagues in the House have all been very supportive, and I just have to say, the entire caucus has been very helpful, but Congresswoman Lawrence, Congresswoman Dingell have been to Flint so many times. You know, it's really incredible that, you know, us Michiganders band together when we're in trouble. I just want to say how much personally I appreciate that. On your principal point, I have my Families of Flint Act, which I've introduced. We're obviously anxious to do what we can, but I just want to say this. Whatever the federal government does is because the federal government has the capacity to help, and the citizens of Flint are American citizens. But no one should have any question about where the principal responsibility for correcting the failure in Flint lies, and that's with the people who did this to Flint, and that's the state government. The state emergency manager made the decisions. The State Department of Environmental Quality tried to cover up the fact that they failed to enforce the lead and copper rule. And there'll be more information coming out that I know through your hearings, but also even with an email dump that I suppose is coming any day now from some staff emails within the state of Michigan. This is a failure at that level of government. We are trying to get help from the federal government because we have the capacity to do so. But beyond that, the principal responsibility lies with the state of Michigan.
Yes.
One of the main criticisms of the DOL conflict of interest rules is that it will cause stockbrokers to flood lower income and middle income clients. Those people will lose advice. Did the Secretary talk about any changes they're making that would mitigate that risk and maybe set the minds at ease of some Democrats who are worried about that outcome?
Yeah, there's not much more than what I think you've already heard us say that we can tell you, because again, the Secretary's limited in what he can say about a rule that has not yet been published. But he did mention that they have tried to exhaustively reach out to people, not just members of Congress, but throughout the country on this issue. They've heard from consumers, they've heard from the industry, they've heard from everyone, and certainly that's one of the concerns, is to make sure that what the rule does is it helps protect investors, but it doesn't prevent advisors and the industry from wanting to do business with those investors. Why don't we?
Can I just ask one?
Why don't we? Let's move on so we can get to everybody's question, because I want to make sure I acknowledge the time that members have. I thought I saw another hand up. If not, then go ahead, Joe.
I just want to say that I think, and I won't quote Secretary Perez, but I paraphrase. He said that the Department of Labor is smarter because of the input of the members of Congress, particularly from our side of the aisle, Democrats, who had communicate with them as well. So I think the end goal here is to get as much information to the retirees and, or people who are saving for retirement, and get the best fiduciary information as well, and get that best practice, and to eliminate the conflicts of interest that may exist within, and do exist within, the industry itself, to give the best opportunity for people to actually save for their retirement.
Any final question? Debbie, did you want
I just wanted to
go
make
ahead?
a human comment here. I think the Secretary was very clear that he couldn't talk much about this because it is a rulemaking and he didn't want to violate anything. But I think what everybody is very conscious as a caucus is the moral responsibility that the world of pensions is changing. So that, I worked for General Motors for 30 years and you had a defined pension, and that changed and you knew what you were going to get at the end. Well, suddenly retirees of all ranges have to manage their own dollars. And everybody's worried about people. I can tell you the stories I've heard, they all do, of people who don't know how to manage money and have never had to do it. And we're all concerned about how do we protect seniors and make sure that they have that income that they've been saving for. That was universal in the caucus, and you heard that today.
If I may just take one more shot at this question. I know the Secretary couldn't get too detailed in that discussion, but based on the tenor of the Q&A, do you get the feeling that most Democrats are going to stick with the administration on this rule?
I think it's pretty fair to say that most Democrats want to head in the direction of what the Secretary said, which, by the way, is what most of the folks in the industry are saying as well. Most of those who want to be able to do well and also do good within the industry want to make sure that the best interest of that small investor, that senior, is taken into account first. So My sense is that the secretary found a lot of agreement with he was saying generally. Any final? Let me go right over here first.
Mr. Becerra,
Yeah.
with regard to the Supreme Court, given the position that the Senate Republican leadership of the state has, no hearings, no votes, no meetings, do you think that should influence the sort of nominee that the president chooses? Some people have suggested a more centrist person, but given that that person, even that sort of person isn't likely to get consideration, do you think perhaps the president should pick someone more inspirational, a liberal Scalia, or perhaps the first black woman justice, or first Latino man, or first openly gay justice? Do you think that that should have some bearing on it?
The president, I think, has made it very clear he's going to pick the person who is most qualified to be the next lifetime justice on the Supreme Court. And fortunately for us, there are many people in America who fit that bill who are very, very qualified. And I hope the president moves forward. As you see from this chart, it's not as if the Senate hasn't acted in an election year to confirm a justice that's been nominated by the president. In fact, the last justice is Justice Kennedy, who got on when you had a Republican who nominated him and a Democratic Senate that confirmed him. And it just seems for the senators, the Republican senators yesterday, to come before the public and essentially profess allegiance to their party, when under the Constitution, they are sworn to move forward the best interests of our country, and they pledge on the Bible to move forward the provisions of the Constitution. And for them to say that they're not going to do this, not because they can't, simply because they don't wish to as a party. I think all of us would recognize if individual senators decided to vote no on any particular nominee and let the chips fall where they may on any final vote. But to simply say, not only will we not vote, but we'll not even have a hearing on the merits of the nominee, or even ourselves as individual senators sit down and meet with the nominee. Again, the allegiance to party is breathtaking, and at some point, I hope that this do-nothing Congress will recognize it has an allegiance to the people of this country and to the Constitution of the United States. Brenda?
I just want to say to those who try to classify what would be palatable for our next nominee, for me to sit here and say that if a person has a certain ethnicity or gender identification, that propels them to a higher level of qualification is insulting. I feel strongly that I have confidence in the president that he's going to fulfill his constitutional responsibility. And that person who comes forward must be vetted by the Senate. They should embrace that because they have a fundamental role in ensuring that we get a qualified person to sit on the justice, sit as a justice. So, I don't want to get bogged down on if it's a black woman, if it's a gay man, if it's a Latino man. What we want and what I fundamentally want from my president, from my government, is that we pick the best person to serve. And for us not to engage and to have one side of the aisle to clearly stand there and define that they will not fulfill their constitutional responsibility because of a philosophy is a sad day in our country.
Let me just say this. Mark Wahlberg was in a movie, and a very famous line, I'm going to kind of use it. The president, he's that guy. He's the guy who's doing his job. Senate Republicans, they must be the other guys. The president's going to do his job. He's going to nominate someone. He's indicated that. Now it's up to the Republican majority to determine whether or not they're going to stall or impede or obstruct or stop that process from moving forward. If they do, and they certainly have the right to do that, if that's the decision they make, it'll be up to the American people to respond to that decision.
Brenda, I think you wanted to follow up with Brenda?
Yeah, just very quickly. My question would be, would it be a special affront if the Republicans blocked and refused to even meet with someone who was very well qualified, but also was path-breaking, someone who was, for instance, the Would that be a special affront to them to snub that person?
They have, to me, and with the policy and statements that they put out yesterday, that process, they were already on that slippery slope. To find, and this is the thing that I want to be very clear on, there are some qualified nominees out there who are African American women, who are gay men, or who are Hispanic men, as we try to put people in boxes. Absolutely. Will one of them come forward? I just want the best qualified. But I know in that qualified bunch is someone that meets that criteria. If they continue to block a qualified person, regardless of what box they fit in, they have already failed to fulfill their responsibility.
Take maybe one or two questions more. I thought I saw it. Okay, last question.
Thanks, Mr. Becerra. I would like your thoughts on whether the Republicans have been handed some more ammunition against the healthcare system if the GAO report is saying unqualified folks are getting in.
I think what we're finding in all the investigative work, whether it's GAO or CBO, those different committees that have jurisdiction over healthcare, what we are finding that so far more than 18 million Americans have been able to acquire legitimate, meaningful health care insurance so that they can send their daughter to the hospital when she is ill, that they don't have to worry that the daughter will be rejected by the insurance company for coverage because of a pre-existing condition, that daughter could actually go all the way to the age of 26 and now continue to be covered by the parents as a result of the Affordable Care Act, and that a whole bunch of seniors today in America, millions of them, now get free preventative health care that they don't have to worry about paying for on a fixed income based on their Social Security benefits. And so what most of the studies, most of the examinations are showing is that the Affordable Care Act is working, and what we're trying to do is now continue to make improvements. It would be great if those Republican governors throughout the country who have refused to adopt the Medicaid expansion program, which helps millions of modest income working families afford health insurance, if those governors would finally adopt the program, which, by the way, is covered 100% by us, by all of us as the federal government for the first several years. That would help a whole bunch of working families today who can't afford coverage and fall through the gaps in those states because Republican governors have refused to implement the expansion of the Medicaid program. And so what mostly we're finding is very good. There are some areas where we know we got to continue to make improvements, but talk to the 18 million plus Americans who today can send their daughter, their son, to a hospital and not worry about being rejected or not being able to pay. It's a pretty big deal. Thank you. With that, we will close. Thank you all very much. And to my colleagues, thank you for being part of this.